This review is going to be a comparison with the original Silent Hill 2 game. As typical with fanatics, they will always claim that the newest thing is the best thing. Fanatics do this because they are encouraged to do so by their masters, but we will see if this is the case with this game. Is this remake truly better than the original? First, I am going to do a really brief review of the original game and then do a more involved review of the remake, in which I am going to make comparison points with the original game. Before that, why are you still watching this on YouTube? Are you retarded? Google is a shit company that has way too much power, it's part of the thought police, and possibly the biggest actor in it. If you dislike anything this company does or has done, you need to support alternative media. If you like my content, go support me on alternative media. I don't even care if you subscribe here. Go to Rumble, go to Odyssey, or go to BitChute. Go look for me there and subscribe there. Oh, but those platforms are bad for this and that. You think YouTube was always the way it is now? No, those platforms will become better the more you support them. You think Rome was built in a day or something? Stop being a bitch. If you complain about the thought police, about this company, but you're still using them as your first source for everything, you are the problem. Stop being a fucking brainless tool. You have power. You can destroy these companies. Use it. Now, back to the video. So let's start. I did my first playthrough of the original game just before playing the remake. There is no nostalgia involved in this review. This is literally the first time I played the original game. I also played the PC Enhanced Edition version. I want to be brief with this section, so let's talk about the good and the bad about the original game. The good. The game atmosphere is great. The graphics, even though a bit dated, they hold surprisingly good, and the locations are very detailed, which adds to the immersion. The game is very fun, and oftentimes I was really wishing to go back to it. It has multiple endings, multiple difficulties for combat and puzzles, the story is decent enough, you don't need to play with tank controls, and now let's go with the bad. The camera sucks. The combat is really clunky, although it's not really the focus of the game. Puzzle logic can be really stupid, like needing to attach hair to a needle to make a hook to pull something out of a drain, the whole making a handle with wax and a horseshoe, etc. The story is not very well explained, and you don't always understand what is the purpose of many of the characters. There is a lack of unlocks compared to a Resident Evil game. Overall, I really like the original game, and I will rate it an 8.5 out of 10 as a whole. Now, let's talk about the remake and how it compares to the original game. It's going to have the same structure, the good and then the bad, but I will make comparisons to the original on each point as needed. So let's talk about the good. The overall experience is a bit more polished compared to the original, yet it's not like the original was an unpolished experience to begin with. In fact, I prefer the original interface more. The graphics are obviously much better, and even being an Unreal Engine slop, it managed to actually have its own style and not feel like this is the typical quote-unquote good graphics that plague every damn new game release that makes them look like they are being made in series, one after the other, with no soul to them. I think this game doesn't have that issue. The environments have a ton of detail to them, it really makes you be immersed all the time. The game has more logical puzzle solutions. This doesn't mean they are necessarily easier, but more than they make more sense and they are not as cryptic or idiotic. It also has multiple endings, multiple difficulties, etc. It has some Easter eggs and throwbacks to the original puzzles, locations and events. The story is pretty much the same, so it stays as a positive. I honestly vastly prefer the camera of this game than the fixed camera of the original game. The boss fights are much better this time around. The combat is an improvement, but I will talk more about this in the negative, so this is more of a neutral point. Now, let's go with the bad. It's plagued by a ton of technical problems like bad frame rates, stuttering, constant crashes, borderless full screen doesn't even work properly, you're basically playing in full screen mode and changing to another window it's a fucking chore due to the situation. On release it didn't have DLSS3 support frame generation. When I reached the apartment section I could not even play the game anymore due to the game crashing constantly in startup. Fortunately a patch released that fixed this and introduced DLSS3 frame generation 15 days after release or so. This is why it will stay as a bad point. I will repeat the same thing I said on my Wukong review. I am tired of these fucking developers using DLSS as a crutch to not optimize their fucking games. It was supposed to be a tool for people to squish more performance. It wasn't supposed to be a way for developers to be lazy fucks and not optimize their fucking games. They uglified the women. Once again, men can have beautiful women these days. They DEI-ficated the outfits of Maria, you know, the typical DEI, woke trash that is injected in these days video games. I personally couldn't stand this trash and just modded my game with better looking women. You don't really have to think anymore on what items you should combine because the game basically does it for you. Now granted, in the original this wasn't difficult to figure out, especially because not all items could be combined, but I find that the remake handles it in a very poor way. The remake relies way too much in jump scares to make you stressed and to make you feel scared. The original didn't have this amount of them, and to be honest I barely remember any of them, and the reason why it's because the original never relies on them. The remake is full of this crutch constantly, constant loud noises, constant enemy ambushes that honestly look so fucking stupid, and instead of making you scared, make you laugh because how stupid they look. Seriously, people that complain that Dark Souls 2 relied way too much on ambushes shouldn't bother with this game because it's much worse. As a consequence, the atmosphere that used to be the main protagonist of the game takes a back seat to the stupid cheap ways the game wants to scare you. The game looks really good and still has some places that make you feel uncomfortable, but most of the time the tension is due to the fact that you are constantly watching your back due to the dumb jump scares.
James? More of those things.
Why are you running? Why are you running? Another one. Another one. Another one. Another one. Another one. And another one. And another one.
Stop it. Get some help.
The game doesn't use yellow paint to show you where you can do stuff, but instead uses white clothes. While not as intrusive as yellow paint, it is still bad and you actually need these indicators and the UI indicators, and the reason why is because the game is so detailed you don't even know what is interactive or what isn't. And that is an issue with all games with quote-unquote good graphics. They add a bunch of noise to the environment and developers keep struggling in how to point the player to the right directions or how to make everything more intuitive without intrusive interface indicators or yellow painting, etc. I honestly think they are just fucking dumb or lazy. It has the same issues as the original, but worse. Lack of unlockables, this game manages to have even less. Weapons don't carry over, you can't wield the great knife as a weapon anymore. Now, these aren't the main issues of the game, so prepare yourself fanatics because you're not going to like what is coming. The remake has two main issues. It is more linear than the original, and the game drags and overstays its welcome. The whole town section may as well just be corridors, because even though the game tries to fool the player to think it's quote-unquote open as the original, it actually can't fool seasoned gamers like myself. It's completely on rails, with a bit of detour here and there. While I appreciate that you can enter some places at the beginning, the original without that allowed you more exploring than this game. This game actually will just close paths behind you to prevent you from going back. This makes the whole experience feel less immersive. The dungeons also have some of these issues. While more free to explore, you always feel like you're just doing the next step. You never really feel lost, or you're almost never presented with two different puzzles that serve different purposes. No, if you are presented with more than one puzzle, it's because one will follow the other, and not because they are for different sections. Add to this the whole quote-unquote traverse through halls of different types, and you end up with a more formulaic experience than the original. So on the topic of the game dragging, how does it manage to make a game that originally was 8 to 10 hours a 20 hours game? Well, with stupid shit. My playthrough of the original was around 10 hours or so, and my remake playthrough was around almost 19 hours. First of all, they added more sections to the dungeons that weren't there, and each one of those locations just keep dragging and dragging and dragging with more and more sections that shouldn't be there in the first place. Another way they drag the game is by bloating the game with more puzzles, redundant puzzles, so you will be solving the puzzle of the puzzle of the puzzle of the puzzle to advance. It feels like it's too much. I really like solving the puzzles, but there was a point in which I just started to hate the whole thing because how much the game just keeps dragging. Another way they managed to drag the game was with the combat. There is way too much enemies in this game. The original was never like this. This game seems like a light version of Dead Space because honestly there are way too much enemies and forced combat sections that weren't present in the original, and the combat starts feeling way too repetitive like a chore. Unlike with games like Dead Space, you have no upgrades, no sweet upgrades, no health upgrades, nothing to look forward, so this is actually pretty bad. I wouldn't have minded this if they added something to support this new take on the combat, but there isn't anything here. So more on the combat. The combat became another quote-unquote Simon Says dodge or you fucking die. I just don't understand why games keep copying the stupid Dark Souls combat. It's fucking prehistoric and boring. The boss fights, while much better, are now just light versions of Souls-like fights where you need to dodge correctly and counter the bosses. They can sometimes counter you too, so you have to dodge again, etc. The combat with normal enemies is mostly the same, but usually you will just shoot on the knee and then follow with melee until death. It's not deep, and if you go full melee, then the combat is just dodge the first enemy attack, attack yourself until you see the enemy is going to attack again and dodge. The enemies have hyper armor attacks, so you are forced to dodge, and on higher difficulties they will most of the time interrupt your attacks with their hyper armor moves, so fights on hard difficult look so fucking stupid beyond belief, like a fast forward turn-based game, with you and the enemy taking turns hitting each other. It's so bad, honestly, looks ridiculous, so I honestly recommend to put the combat on light, because not only does it look stupid in harder difficulties, but also makes the game a chore to play. Enemies will also revive or respawn to make sure you waste more time. As you can see, they managed to double the original game duration with these cheap tactics, and it hurts the overall experience. These games are supposed to be replayable to get more endings, to play more difficulties, but a lot of people won't bother to play a 20 hours game that doesn't support these 20 hours of game time. It doesn't have the systems to support such long playthroughs. Now, we know games these days are not made for gamers and are targeted towards the retarded normies, the fanatics and streamers of course. So most normies will just play the game once and ditch it. A lot of them will just buy it and not play it, because they will see the whole thing by watching their favorite Parasite streamer play it, and let's be honest, it is better to have a more lengthy game for a stream than a shorter one. The remake is not a bad game per se, but it is a shitty remake. I think the original is superior because it doesn't have all the bad shit they introduce in the remake. The original isn't as linear, it doesn't drag like this, so more playthroughs are possible before you feel tired. I don't know why whenever a remake comes out, it most of the time falls into the hands of retards that think, oh, I can do better. No, you don't. You piece of shit, you don't. Respect the fucking source material. Same happens with the adaptations of books, comics, video games, etc. into movies or series, especially now with the whole degenerate agendas pushed on them. My final score for the Silent Hill 2 remake, it's a 6.5 out of 10. It had the potential to be a much better experience, but unfortunately they just decided to mess with a piece of the game. They focused way too much on the clunky combat, they uglified the women, they made the game feel more linear, the over-reliance on jump scares rather than the atmosphere itself is bad too. The original game stays superior to this one. I recommend buying it on a sale or sailing the high seas for this. It's not really worth it full price, which funnily enough, it's the complete opposite effect of what they expected by dragging the game like they did to increase its value and then only managed to decrease it. What a bunch of idiots. Well, with that being said, my next review is going to be finally the Metaphor review. I am finally going to have the chance to sit and play that game. I played a bit of the prologue of the demo, but to be honest, I haven't had the time because a lot of new things keep presenting, like Silent Hill 2 Remake, but I'm going to do that next. After that, it will be the Romancing Saga 2 review, and honestly, I am really eager to play that game. So I hope nothing else presents itself before that, before those two reviews. I may review that fucking dog shit piece of shit Dragon Age the Veilguard. I will probably do it after I finish these two reviews because they are more important to me than that piece of fucking DEI woke slope garbage, and I kind of want to do the review of that piece of shit, but at the same time I want to ignore it because honestly it's just fucking offensive to me that that game even exists. It looks like a fucking piece of shit, seriously. I cannot believe Dragon Age has devolved into that garbage, but let's be honest, this was expected. This shit started in Dragon Age 2. All this fucking degeneration of the formula started there, so we can only hope that this is the end of BioWare, that this kills the fucking studio, that this hurts EA really bad, and that's about it. So with that being said, that will be all for this video.